The lilacs outside my window were finally blooming. I reached out to the branches hanging from my windowsill and carefully cut a few blossoms for the vase on the kitchen table. My garden had always been my pride. Even the neighbors sometimes stopped to admire the tulips along the path and the lush hydrangeas by the porch. I, Iris Pute, have been a widow for 5 years. My husband Walter left suddenly, a heart attack right in the supermarket. I remember noticing missed calls on my phone after returning from a flower show. I remember the hospital corridor and the doctor with tired eyes. I remember Conway, our only son, not arriving until the next day, placing the lilacs in a crystal vase, a wedding gift that had survived nearly 4 decades of marriage. I turned on the radio. In the kitchen of my Maple Street home, everything had its place. Blood pressure pills were neatly arranged in a container by day of the week. Bills were stacked in a special folder, and a shopping list written in my clear handwriting was magnetically attached to the refrigerator. In Auburn, the investigation into the collapse of the East Wing of the high school athletic complex continues. As a reminder, the tragedy occurred 3 weeks ago during regionals, the announcer suddenly said in a more serious tone. I shook my head. The whole town was still reeling from the tragedy. 2 dead teachers and a severely traumatized child. My thoughts lingered briefly on the families of the victims. What are they going through? At 69, I was still active and independent, which I valued above all else. 35 years as an accountant for an insurance company taught me the value of order and organization. I retired a year before my husband died, planning to travel with him. Instead, I was left alone with guidebooks to Europe that never came in handy. Looking in the hallway mirror, I fixed my close-cropped gray hair. No old-fashioned perm, just a modern cut. Neat and practical. I preferred to dress simply, but tastefully, too. Today, I chose dark blue pants and a navy blouse. My phone rang as I applied some lip gloss. The name on the screen made my heart clench. Conway. My son rarely called, usually with a specific purpose or request. Mom, it's me. His voice sounded strained. How are you? Hello, Conway.
I'm fine.
I'm gardening, I answered, taking a seat on the chair by the phone table. Listen, Brianna and I were thinking, maybe you could come over for dinner tonight. I couldn't hide my surprise. Did something happen? Nothing's wrong, he said, a familiar irritation in his voice. We just want to see each other. You're my mother. Don't you need an excuse? I always needed an excuse. We both knew that. I'd been to their house no more than 5 times in the last 2 years. Always for a specific reason. Christmas, Conway's birthday, the anniversary of Walter's death. Spontaneous invitations weren't their style. Of course, I'll come, I agreed after pause. What time? 7 o'clock. Brianna's cooking something special. Something special from Brianna usually meant a complicated dish she'd cooked from a recipe on a cooking blog, so she could go into detail about the process, as if I hadn't been an accountant for 30 years and couldn't figure out what blanching or sauce reduction meant. After the call, I decided to return to the garden. It had become my salvation after Walter's death. When grief threatened to swallow me whole, I would go out with a shovel and rake and work until I was exhausted. There was something therapeutic about the process. Seeing a small seed grow into a whole plant, seeing nature continue its cycle in spite of human loss and tragedy. Walter always teased me about my love of numbers and precision. Iris, even flowers you plan on a ruler, he used to say with a smile. He was a high school history teacher, a bit absent-minded, always with a book in hand. My complete opposite, but that's why our marriage worked so well. I planned, he dreamed. I counted, he told stories. Conway wasn't like me or his father. From childhood, he was a sullen, withdrawn child who had trouble connecting with his peers. I tried to teach him discipline and responsibility, seeing that Walter's thoughtlessness only made things worse. Perhaps I was too strict. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder about that. But at the time, it felt like I was doing the right thing. Civil engineer was not the profession I envisioned for my son. It seemed to me that with his penchant for the exact sciences, he could have been a scientist or a teacher. But Conway chose a more practical path. That's where the real money is, Mom, he explained upon entering Polytech. He met Brianna there too in his third year. She was studying business administration and immediately gave me the impression of a calculating person, tall, slender, with cold gray eyes and perpetually pinched lips. Even at their wedding, watching her methodically oversee all the details of the celebration, I felt that for her, it was more like a successfully completed project than the happiest day of her life. They didn't have children. Now is not the time. We need to focus on our careers. Brianna worked in the marketing department of a pharmaceutical company and clearly had her sights set on a management position. Her career ambitions always came first. I watered the velvets and tied up the sprawling tomatoes. Working in the garden always helped me think. Conway's invitation was strange, unlike him. He usually called when he needed something: advice on a tax return, help choosing a gift for Brianna, or asking to borrow money until payday. This sudden dinner for no reason was vaguely disturbing. The last time we'd met hadn't ended well. It had been 3 months ago on his birthday. Brianna had made some exotic dish that was almost inedible, and we'd all pretended to enjoy it. The conversation wasn't going well. I asked about his work, and Conway mumbled something about problems with project deadlines. Brianna turned the topic to their plans to buy a new car, obviously more expensive than they could afford. When I cautiously noted this, the atmosphere at the table grew noticeably colder. "Mom," Conway said then in a tone he'd used as a teenager when he thought I was hopelessly outdated. "Not everyone needs to save every penny for a rainy day. Some of us want to live in the present. And that's why you're still paying off a loan for a house you can't afford," I said, out of breath. Brianna put down her fork and gave me the same look as if I were not her husband's mother, but an annoying old woman meddling in her business. "Iris," she said in her businesswoman tone, "we appreciate your concern, but please trust our choice. After all, this is our life." Conway hadn't called for almost 3 months after that evening, and now this unexpected invitation. I went back to the house and decided to call Olivia, an old friend of mine since high school. She lived in Seattle, but we called at least once a week. "Ollie, it's me, Iris. How are you doing, honey?" Her voice, always full of energy, had a calming effect on me. Conway invited me to dinner tonight out of the blue. Oh, there was so much understanding in that short sound. Olivia knew the whole history of my complicated relationship with my son. "Do you think I should go?" "Why wouldn't I?" she said judiciously. "At worst, you'll have another unpleasant evening. You've survived 35 years with numbers and spreadsheets. You can handle a few hours with your son and daughter-in-law." I smiled involuntarily. Olivia always knew how to cheer me up. "You're right. It's just weird. Maybe they finally decided to have a baby," Olivia suggested. "Or are they planning a move?" I doubt it. Brianna had just gotten a promotion, so they weren't likely to go anywhere. And as for the kids, she'd always said motherhood wasn't in her plans. We chatted some more about our gardens. Olivia was growing orchids on the windowsill of her apartment and the recent scandal on the Auburn City Council over budget allocation. When I mentioned the tragedy at the school, Olivia sighed. "Terrible. Saw the report on national news. How could this happen in a new building? They say there's going to be a massive investigation. The mayor has already made a statement that those responsible will be punished." After talking to Olivia, I decided to get ready for tonight. Although my instincts told me it would be another tense dinner, I couldn't shake a strange feeling. There was something off about Conway's voice, a nervousness I couldn't help but notice as a mother. I'd chosen a dark maroon dress and pearl earrings for dinner, a gift from Walter for our 30th anniversary. He always said that color suited me. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who had been through a lot. The loss of her beloved husband, the estrangement of her only son, the disappointments and joys of a long life. The wrinkles on her face told the story of that life better than any words could. At 6:30, I got into my old but impeccably maintained Toyota Camry and headed to my son's house in suburban Auburn. The evening was warm, typical of early summer. Along the way, I spotted a group of workers installing fencing around a damaged wing of the high school athletic complex. The scale of the destruction was impressive, even from a distance. The driveway to Conway and Brianna's house was paved with expensive stone, one of the luxuries they'd allowed themselves, despite their precarious financial situation. The two-story house with white columns at the entrance seemed inappropriately pretentious for a young couple without children. These houses were usually bought by established families with solid capital, not by a 37-year-old engineer with a mortgage-burdened marketing wife. I turned off the engine and sat in silence for a while, gathering my wits. The lights were on in almost all the windows, and there were cars in the driveway. Conway's black SUV and Brianna's silver sedan, much newer and more expensive than one might expect. They're getting into credit again, I thought disapprovingly, but immediately reined myself in. It was none of my business how they handled their finances. Brianna opened the door before I could ring the bell. She was wearing a tight black dress, more appropriate for the office than a home dinner, and high-heeled shoes, as if she were going to a business presentation rather than a family meeting. She traced a welcoming kiss in the air near my cheek, without touching my skin. "You're precise as always." I could hear the slight reproach in her tone, as if my punctuality was some kind of flaw. I never understood why some people thought it was polite to keep others waiting. "Hello, Brianna. I brought dessert." I handed her the basket of blueberry pie I'd baked this afternoon. She took the basket with 2 fingers, like something of questionable purity. "Oh, that's nice. I already made tiramisu, though." "Well, we'll put your pie in case anyone wants a refill." Typical Brianna. Neglect disguised as a compliment. In a spacious living room with high ceilings and leather furniture that always seemed uncomfortable to me, Conway stood at the bar pouring himself a whiskey. He was dressed in dark slacks and a light blue shirt rolled up to his elbows, an outfit more formal than I'd expected for a home-cooked dinner. He set the glass down and came over to hug me. The hug came out stiff and quick. "I'm glad you could make it." For the first time, I noticed how exhausted he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes and new wrinkles on his forehead. Conway had always been thin, but now his cheeks seemed sunken, and his suit shirt hung over his shoulders like it was off someone else's shoulder. "Of course, I'm here. It's been a long time," I replied, scrutinizing his face. "Are you feeling okay? You look tired." "Just a lot of work." He looked away, avoiding my gaze. "What are you drinking? Wine or maybe a martini?" "A little white wine, please." Conway nodded and went back to the bar, and Brianna appeared from the kitchen, taking off her apron as she went. "Dinner's almost ready. I made risotto with mushrooms and truffle oil. I hope you don't mind mushrooms, Iris." "No, not at all," I answered, though I'd never been a fan of fine dining. I preferred simple home-cooked meals, roasts, mashed potatoes, casseroles, but Brianna was always eager to impress with her culinary experiments. We moved to the dining room table, another room that I felt was unnecessary in a house this size. The huge darkwood table was set like a haute cuisine restaurant, crystal clear glasses, silverware, starched napkins. All this for 3 people. Brianna bustled about arranging plates of risotto garnished with some microscopic leaves and swirls of sauce. Conway sat at the head of the table, absorbed in his own thoughts, occasionally sipping his whiskey and tapping his fingers nervously on the tablecloth. "So, Iris," Brianna began, lowering herself elegantly into the chair across from me. "How is your garden? Conway tells me you've taken to growing tomatoes this year." Small talk was not Brianna's strong suit. Her questions always sounded like she was reading off a prepared card. "Yeah, 5 different varieties. The cherries are starting to ripen," I said, tasting the risotto. It was too salty and overcooked, but I smiled politely. "It's delicious, Brianna." "It's a recipe from a famous chef in Milan," she said proudly. "The truffle oil is imported, specially ordered." Brianna's phone, lying next to her plate, vibrated. She grabbed it instantly, glanced at the screen, and stood up. "If you'll excuse me, I need to take this. It's important." She walked quickly out of the room, and I noticed that Conway gave her a tense look. When the door closed behind her, he took a swig of his whiskey. "Everything all right, son?" I asked quietly. "Sure," he tried to smile, but it was crooked and insincere. "It's just a difficult period at work. Deadlines are looming. Bosses are pushing." Is it always like this at Auburn Construction? I remember you used to praise the work environment. His shoulders visibly tensed at the mention of the company name. Things have changed. New management, new demands. He looked away again. Let's not talk about work, okay? Tell me how you're doing. What have you been up to lately besides the garden? I started to talk about the book club our local library had recently organized and my volunteer work at the animal shelter, but I sensed Conway wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on the window, and his fingers continued to beat a nervous drum on the tablecloth. Brianna returned a few minutes later, her face seeming even more tense. Sorry for the interruption. She sat down at the table again. Work matters. We're launching a new campaign, and everything has to be perfect. Sunday night. I couldn't resist asking. There are no weekends in our field, Iris, she said with a touch of irritation. Modern business requires constant involvement. I understand. I decided to change the subject. By the way, I drove by the school today. It was a terrible tragedy with that collapse. The whole town is still in shock. The glass in Conway's hand shook, and a few drops of whiskey spilled onto the tablecloth. Brianna instantly tensed and gave him a warning glance. Yes, a nightmare, she said after a pause. But let's not talk about sad things at dinner. Iris, did you hear that they're going to open a new shopping center in Auburn right by the lake? They say it's going to be a Nordstrom's branch. This abrupt transition from tragedy to shopping seemed indelicate, but I didn't make a big deal of it. No, I hadn't. I rarely go shopping, though. I already have everything I need. It never hurts to update your closet. Brianna looked at my burgundy dress with a critical eye. By the way, there's a great boutique in our mall for women your age. Very stylish stuff, but comfortable. I held back a smile. Typical Brianna. Even a compliment from her sounds like a disguised insult. Thanks for the recommendation, but I'm quite happy with my closet. Conway seemed completely disengaged from the conversation. He ate mechanically without lifting his eyes from his plate, glancing occasionally at his watch as if waiting for something. Brianna kept up a strained conversation, jumping from topic to topic, from the new exhibition at the City Gallery to the latest political news. She spoke quickly, almost feverishly, as if she was afraid of a pause in the conversation. When the main course was finished, Brianna got up to bring dessert. Barely had she left the room when Conway's phone vibrated. He grabbed it with such haste that he nearly knocked over his glass. Yes, he said quietly, turning away from me. I can't talk right now. Yes, I understand. No, not yet. He stopped talking, noticing that I was watching him, and ended the conversation quickly. I'll call you back later. Work too? I asked cautiously. Yes, he answered briefly. Like I said, a difficult period. Conway? I decided to try again. If you're in trouble, you know you can. I don't have a problem, Mom, he interrupted sharply. Just stress at work, that's all. At that moment, Brianna returned with tiramisu on an elegant serving platter. My blueberry pie was left somewhere in the kitchen, forgotten and ignored. I hope you left room for dessert, she said with a strange smile. I used real Italian mascarpone and homemade savoiardi. I nodded politely, even though I had no idea what savoiardi was. While Brianna was arranging the dessert on plates, her phone rang again. This time she didn't even apologize, just grabbed it and quickly left the room. Through the closed door, I could hear her muffled but clearly agitated voice. Conway was staring at the untouched dessert in front of him, his face as grim as a storm cloud. Son, I couldn't take it anymore. What's going on? You're both acting weird. If you have a problem. There's no problem, he said, but his voice shook. It's just going through a rough patch. We all do. You look exhausted lately. You've lost weight. Circles under your eyes. It's not like normal work stress. Mom, he sounded steely. I appreciate your concern, but I'm a grown man, and I can handle my own problems if I have any at all. Brianna returned, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly. Sorry, work again. She sat down and picked up her fork, but she didn't touch her dessert. There was an awkward silence. I tasted the tiramisu. It was too sweet and soaked in something alcoholic. It was delicious, I lied. Thank you. Brianna nodded absently, looking away from me. It's a recipe from. Her phone vibrated again, and she literally jumped in her seat. Glancing at the screen, she was petrified. Brianna looked at Conway anxiously. It's okay, she answered quickly, muting the sound on her phone. It's just I'll need to stop by the office tonight after dinner, Sunday night. Now Conway asked the same question I asked earlier. Yes, there was an unexpected problem with the new campaign. She smiled nervously. You know how it is. No, I don't, Conway replied abruptly. Because normal people don't work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's not normal, Brianna. I looked at my son in surprise. I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard him contradict his wife. Is it normal to build defective buildings that collapse? Brianna blurted out and then covered her mouth with her hand as if she wanted to take it back. There was a heavy silence in the room. Conway's face turned white, and his eyes filled with a fury that made me uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Brianna said quickly. I didn't mean it like that. It's just that we're all worked up about work. Conway silently got up from the table and left the room. A few seconds later, I heard his office door slam. Brianna sat with her head down, her shoulders shaking. When she looked up at me, there was a look of desperation in her eyes.
I'm sorry, Iris.
Dinner was clearly not a success. We're both not at our best tonight. Brianna, I lowered my voice. What's going on? And don't talk to me about work stress. I've lived long enough to know the difference between normal fatigue and real problems. She stared at me for a long moment, as if assessing whether to tell the truth. Finally, she shook her head. Nothing we can't handle. Her tone was cold and detached again. Every family has hard times. She stood up and began to collect the plates. Leave them. I'll clean them up myself. You must be tired. Perhaps you'd better go home. I'll tell Conway you said goodbye. It was a direct line to the door, but I was in no hurry to leave. Tell Conway that if he needs help, any help, I'm always here for him. I'm his mother, and I'll always be at his side. Of course, Brianna nodded, not looking me in the eye. I'll tell him. As I stood in the hallway putting on my light coat, Conway came out of his office. His eyes were red, like he was holding back tears. Leaving already? He asked, and I could hear the panic in his voice. Yeah. Brianna said, You're both tired. I don't want to impose. You don't. He stopped like he couldn't find the words. Thanks for coming, Conway. I stepped closer and put my hand on his shoulder. If you need to talk about anything, I'm always ready to listen. Something flickered in his eyes for a moment, a desire to trust, to ask for help. But then his face went blank again. It's okay, Mom. It really is. Just, take care of yourself, okay? The phrase sounded strange, almost ominous, like he was saying goodbye. You too, son, I said, feeling my anxiety rising. As I stepped out onto the porch, I turned around. Conway was standing in the doorway, his figure seeming lonely and lost against the vast, empty house. He raised his hand in a parting gesture, and something in the movement made my heart clench with pain. As I got into the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something very serious was going on in my son's life, and he wouldn't or couldn't tell me about it. The drive home seemed endless. Auburn streetlights cast a dim light on the asphalt wet from the recent rain. I drove slowly, replaying the strangeness of the evening over and over in my head. The tension between Conway and Brianna was almost palpable. Their constant phone calls, their nervousness, their mutual recriminations, all added up to a disturbing picture. I was particularly disturbed by Brianna's line about defective buildings that then collapse. It sounded not like an abstract example, but a direct accusation, and Conway's reaction. I've never seen him so lost and scared. As I stopped at the stoplight, I remembered the reports of the collapse at the high school sports complex. Conway worked for Auburn Construction, the company that, if I'm not mistaken, was involved in the construction of that complex. Could it be? No, it can't be. My son is certainly not the most empathetic person, but he couldn't have been involved in a tragedy that took lives. The traffic light switched to green, and I slowly pulled out of the driveway. The headlights of a car that seemed to be following me from the Conway house flashed in my rearview mirror. Paranoia, maybe. The events of the evening had clearly thrown me off my game. I decided to stop at the convenience store. I needed time to collect my thoughts, and mindlessly walking between shelves always helped me think. Besides, if someone was really following me, this would be a good way to check. Parking outside the supermarket, I turned off the engine and looked around. The car I'd noticed earlier drove past and disappeared around the corner. Just a coincidence, I told myself. My nerves were fraying. The store was almost empty. A few students stocking up on chips and energy drinks. An elderly couple studying canned goods. A sleepy cashier flipping through something on her phone. I picked up my basket and began to wander aimlessly between the rows, immersed in my thoughts. What if my suspicions were correct? What if Conway really did have something to do with the tragedy at school? No, I refused to believe it. He could be cold, even callous at times, but not a criminal. Not a man capable of putting children's lives at risk. I was so immersed in my thoughts that I flinched when the phone in my bag made the sound of an incoming message. Taking it out, I saw an unfamiliar number on the screen and a short text, "Leave now. Don't say anything to him." I reread the message several times, trying to make sense of it. Leave from where? Not tell who? And who was the sender? My first thought was that someone had gotten the wrong number, but something told me that the message was addressed to me. I decided to call the number, but the phone said, "The called party is unavailable." That's weird. Could this be some kind of prank? Or the thought that came to my mind seemed absurd, but I couldn't dismiss it. What if the message had something to do with that weird dinner at Conway and Brianna's? I looked at the time. 21:30. Only half an hour had passed since I'd left their house. On a sudden impulse, I decided to go back, not go in, just drive by, make sure everything was okay. Leaving the full basket in the aisle, apologizing mentally to the store employees, I quickly walked out into the parking lot and got into my car. My hands shook slightly as I started the engine. On the drive back to my son's house, I continued to ponder the strange message. Leave now. Don't say anything to him. Assuming that it was addressed to me and applied to tonight, I had already left, but the second part was alarming. Don't say anything to him.
Him? Conway?
What was I supposed to keep quiet about? I turned onto the quiet street where Conway and Brianna lived. I could see from a distance that something was wrong. There were several cars with blinkers outside their house, 2 police cars and 1 black unmarked car. Uniformed and plainclothes people crowded the driveway and lawn.
My heart clenched with a bad feeling.
I parked on the opposite side of the street, far enough away not to attract attention, but close enough to see what was happening. What happened? A robbery? An accident? And then I saw 2 officers escort Conway out of the house. He was handcuffed, head down, shoulders slumped. Behind him was Brianna, her arms wrapped around herself, her face contorted with sobs. The policeman was saying something to her, but she didn't seem to hear, looking only at her husband, who was being put into a black car. I couldn't believe my eyes. My son had been arrested. For what? What had he done? And suddenly, everything fell into place. His nervousness at dinner, the strange phone calls, Brianna's outburst about the collapsed buildings. Had Conway had something to do with the tragedy at the school? My hand automatically reached for the phone. I looked at the cryptic message again. It made sense now. Someone knew about the arrest ahead of time and had warned me to avoid being in the middle of the action. But who and why? As I pondered, the phone rang again. The same unknown number. This time the caller was available. "Hello," I said in a trembling voice. "Iris." The voice on the other end was female, young, and excited. It was Tess. Tess Willets. "Do you remember me?" "Olivia's daughter." Tess, my best friend's daughter. Of course, I remembered her. Serious girl, always with a book in her hand. She must be in her early 30s by now. Tess. Yeah, of course I remember her. But why? "Sorry for the strange message," she interrupted. I couldn't speak freely. I work for the district attorney's office. We've been investigating Auburn construction for months now. Today, we're making arrests. As I watched the black car with my son drive away from the house, I felt the ground slipping from under my feet. Conway was all I could say. Yeah. Tess sounded sympathetic.
I'm sorry, Iris.
Mom told me you were going to have dinner with him tonight. I couldn't have you there at the time of the arrest. It would have been, traumatic. What was he arrested for? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. I can't discuss the details of the investigation, Tess replied. But it has to do with the collapse at the school's sports complex. Auburn Construction was the general contractor. Your son was responsible for checking the quality of materials and building code compliance. The world spun around me. I gripped the phone tighter, trying to keep my balance. And he, failed in his duties. The pause on the other end of the line was more eloquent than any words. Iris, I really can't talk about the details, but, the evidence is strong, very serious. I watched as the police continued to remove boxes of documents and computer equipment from the house. Brianna stood on the porch with her arms wrapped around herself, her shoulders shaking with sobs. One of the officers handed her some kind of paper, a search warrant, I assumed. What's going to happen now? I asked, feeling completely lost. He'll be taken to the county jail for processing. Tomorrow is his first hearing where he'll be arraigned and bail will be set. Tess's voice became more formal, more professional. Iris, I should not have called you. It wasn't exactly ethical of me, but Mom always spoke so fondly of you. I couldn't let you get into this situation. Thank you, Tess, I whispered. I appreciate your concern. I have to go. Take care of yourself, Iris. Prepare yourself for what's going to be difficult. This case is going to get a lot of publicity. She passed out, and I continued to sit in the car, unable to move. My thoughts were jumbled. My son Conway, the civil engineer, always so meticulous and responsible. Had he had something to do with people dying? No, he couldn't be. There must be some explanation. But deep down inside, I knew there was, and it didn't exonerate Conway. Too many things fit together. His nervousness in recent months, his constant talk of financial difficulties, his sudden decision to buy Brianna an expensive car. And tonight, that atmosphere of tense anticipation in the house, as if they knew what was about to happen. I remembered the look in Brianna's eyes as I left. She knew, maybe not all the details, but definitely suspected that Conway was involved in something illegal. And that weird question about the tragedy at the school. Maybe she was trying to find out if I knew anything. And then it hit me. What if they thought I knew too, that someone had warned me of an impending arrest, and that was why I had left so quickly? That thought explained Brianna's stare when I cited feeling sick. The police cars began to drive away. Only Brianna and one plainclothes officer remained on the porch explaining something to her. She nodded, mechanically signing some papers. I started the car and slowly pulled away from the curb, trying not to attract attention. The last thing I wanted to do right now was run into Brianna or the police. I needed time to process what was happening and decide what to do next. On the drive home, I couldn't get rid of my thoughts about how things had gotten to this point. Conway had always been ambitious, but I never thought he was capable of breaking the law for career or money. What made him do it? Pressure from management? Financial problems? Brianna's influence with her exorbitant demands? When I parked in front of my house, I sat in my car for a long time, unable to get out. Tomorrow, all of Auburn would be talking about the arrest of the engineer involved in the school tragedy. The newspapers would write about it. The local TV would report on it. And me? What will I do? My phone rang again. This time it was Olivia, Tess's mother. Iris. Her voice sounded concerned. Tess just called me. She told me everything.
How are you?
I don't know, I answered honestly. I can't believe this is happening. Do you want me to come over? I could be at your place tomorrow afternoon. Olivia lived in Seattle, a 3-hour drive from Auburn. No, that's okay, I said. I can handle it, but thanks for offering. Iris, listen. Olivia's voice became serious. Tess says it's serious. Very serious. They're not just accusing Conway of negligence. They believe he knowingly falsified documents about the quality of materials, knowing that the building might be unsafe. Those words hit me like a physical blow.
No, y whisperat.
He couldn't have. Tess says they have proof, emails, witness statements. He wasn't alone, of course. A whole group of people from Auburn Construction were involved, but Conway was the key figure. He was the one who signed the quality assurance documents. I closed my eyes, feeling nausea coming up my throat. My son, my only child. The man I'd raised taught honesty and responsibility. How could he do this? What's in store for him? I asked, afraid of the answer. Tess isn't sure. It depends on many factors. Cooperation with the investigation, previous convictions, but given that there are dead people. Olivia stopped talking, not wanting to say what we were both thinking. Prison time, a long prison sentence. I have to talk to him, I said. Get his side of the story. Of course, Olivia agreed. But Iris, prepare yourself for the possibility that his version may not be the same as reality. People who've made serious mistakes often deny their guilt, even to themselves. After talking to Olivia, I finally found the strength to get out of the car and into the house. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it a few hours ago. A book on the couch, tea on the table, a bouquet of lilacs in a vase. But I was a different person, the mother of a criminal, a woman whose son was involved in the deaths of people. I turned on the TV, switching channels in search of local news. And there it was. The familiar school sports complex building with a collapsed east wing appeared on the screen. The frames changed to the sight of police cars outside Conway's house. The announcer spoke of a breakthrough in the investigation, a series of arrests of Auburn construction executives and employees. According to preliminary findings, the company systematically used substandard materials in the construction of municipal projects, falsified documentation, and bribed inspectors to obtain necessary permits, the announcer broadcast. Among those arrested is Chief Quality Control Engineer Conway, who was directly responsible for inspecting the materials used in the construction of the collapsed sports complex. A photo of Conway appeared on the screen, an official portrait from the company's website. He looked confident, successful, respectable. Who would have thought that behind that facade there was a man willing to risk people's lives for what? Money, career advancement. I turned off the TV, unable to listen to any more of this. My mind was spinning with scraps of thoughts. Why did Conway do this? When had he turned down that path? What had I missed in his upbringing? Or was it not about me, but about his own choices? I remembered how I taught little Conway responsibility and honesty. How I'd explained that there was no cheating, that every action had consequences. What had happened to that boy? Maybe I pushed him too hard, demanded too much, or on the contrary, not guiding him enough, letting Brianna's influence and her materialistic values take over. My head was splitting with unanswered questions. I went upstairs to the bedroom and pulled an old photo album out of the closet. Flipping through the pages, I looked at the pictures of little Conway. Here he was taking his first steps. Here he was going to first grade with a huge bouquet for his teacher. Here he was getting his college diploma. In all the pictures, he's smiling, that open, genuine smile that I haven't seen on his face in so long. When did he change? At what point did money and status become more important to him than human lives? I closed the album and looked at the clock. It was almost midnight.
Tomorrow would be a hard day.
I need to decide what to do next. Go to the county jail, try to see my son, or wait for the court hearing. And what will I say to him when I meet him? As I lay in bed, I replayed the evening's events over and over in my head. The strange dinner invitation, the tension between Conway and Brianna, the cryptic message from Tess, and then the arrest, the police cars, my son in handcuffs. I barely slept that night. I could see the footage of the school sports complex collapse in front of me. The mangled beams, the broken concrete, the rescuers carrying out the victims, 2 dead teachers, a student with serious injuries, and all of this is the result of my son's actions. How do I live with that knowledge? How do I face the people of Auburn, many of whom surely know that I am the mother of the very engineer who got people killed? By morning, I had made a decision. I have to see Conway, hear his side of the story, understand what happened and why. Not to forgive. Some things are not worth forgiving, but to know the truth, the whole truth, no matter how bitter. The Auburn County Jail greeted me with gray walls and barbed wire around the perimeter. It was 8:30 on the clock. I had deliberately arrived early to avoid meeting with reporters or acquaintances. I had never thought I would have to visit a prison, much less see my own son. The check-in procedure was humiliating, checking documents, searching, filling out forms. The guard, an older man with tired eyes, looked at me with ill-concealed sympathy. "Mrs. Pute," he clarified. "You're here to see Conway Pute, right?" "Yes." My voice sounded dry. "He's my son." The guard nodded and pointed to a bench in the hallway. "Wait here. He'll be brought to the visiting room in a moment." 15 minutes later, I was ushered into a small room divided by a glass partition. When Conway was brought in, I hardly recognized him. Only one night in prison, and he looked 10 years older. His orange prison robe hung over his gaunt shoulders, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Mom," his voice sounded hoarse. "You came?" "Of course I came," I replied, trying to stay calm. "You're my son. I didn't know if you'd want to see me after everything." "I want to hear the truth, Conway. What happened?" He was silent for a long time, then slowly began to speak. "It started 3 years ago. The company won the bid to build a school sports complex. At first, it was about little things, using cheaper finishing materials, reducing the number of workers. Then we started replacing the load-bearing structures. Instead of top-class metal beams, we used cheaper ones that had not been certified. Concrete was diluted. Rebar was used less often." "And you knew about this?" "Yes," he nodded without looking up. "I didn't just know. I signed documents to prove that everything was up to code. I falsified test results. City inspectors were getting paid. I was personally handing over envelopes of money." I listened, and with every word he said, the chasm between us grew deeper. "Why, Conway?" "First, out of fear of losing my job. To turn it down was to jeopardize my career. Then it was money. Big money, bonuses, perks, raises. Brianna and I bought our dream house, new cars, and all this at the cost of people's lives. I never thought anyone would get hurt," he exclaimed. "We told ourselves that the safety margin was large, that nothing terrible would happen. That's what everyone does in the construction business." "But it did," I said firmly. "2 teachers are dead. A child maimed." Conway lowered his head, his shoulders shaking. "What are you in danger of doing?" I finally asked. "My lawyer says 10 to 20 years. If I cooperate and testify against the company's management, it could go down to 7 to 10. And Brianna, did she know?" "Not everything. She knew that things at the company weren't exactly clean, but not the details. At least that's what I thought until yesterday." "What do you mean?" "She didn't seem surprised when the police showed up. I think she knew an arrest was imminent. Maybe even knew the exact date. That's why she insisted on having dinner with you."
Why?
"To give the appearance of a normal family life before the arrest? To see if you knew something? Who knows what's in her head? Brianna has always only cared about herself." His words reminded me of the cryptic message in Tess Willett's. "Conway, the way there's something I have to tell you," I began. "Yesterday after dinner, I received a strange message. Go away now. Don't say anything to him." It was from Tess Willett's, Olivia's daughter. She works in the district attorney's office and knew about the impending arrest. Conway froze, his eyes widening in surprise. "So that's why you left in such a hurry. Brianna, and I thought you somehow found out about my problems and didn't want anything to do with us."
I didn't know anything until last night.
Tess warned me not to get caught in the middle of an arrest. She was worried that I might be questioned as a possible accomplice. "Mom," he said after a pause, "can you ever forgive me?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know, Conway. What you did, it's not a minor offense. People died. Lives have been ruined. I will support you, because I'm your mother. But to forgive you? I'm not sure I can." His face contorted in pain, but I couldn't let myself soften. Tess Willets was waiting for me at the prison exit. I recognized her immediately, even though I hadn't seen her in years. A tall, slender woman in a strict business suit with a short haircut and intelligent eyes, a carbon copy of Olivia in her youth. "Iris," she came toward me. "I was hoping to meet you here." "Thanks for the warning yesterday," I said. "I didn't act according to protocol," she lowered her voice. "Officially, I wasn't supposed to do that, but Mom would never forgive me if I let you get into that situation." We went to a cafe across the street from the prison. Tess ordered 2 cappuccinos, and when the waitress stepped away, she asked, "How is he?" "Not good," I answered honestly. Confused, scared, trying to justify himself. "He says he didn't think anyone would get hurt." "They never do," Tess smiled sadly. "It's always the same in these cases. Greed and self-confidence overshadow common sense." "What kind of evidence do you have?" I asked. Tess paused, then leaned closer. "I shouldn't discuss the details of the investigation, but we have email correspondence between the company's management and your son that explicitly discusses the substitution of materials and the falsification of documentation. We have testimony from workers who followed instructions to save materials. We have evidence of bribes to city inspectors. And most importantly, experts have determined that the cause of the collapse was the use of substandard materials and violation of construction technology."
Who died?
"Who was hurt?" I needed to know. "Lorraine Hobbs, 32, gym teacher, recently married. Simon Reyes, 45, science teacher, father of 3. And Emma Caldwell, 14, student. She has multiple fractures, spinal injury. Doctors aren't sure if she'll ever be able to walk." The names and stories made the tragedy even more real, even more painful. "Yesterday," Tess continued, "when I saw you outside your son's house after the arrest." "Did you come back?" "Yes," I admitted. "When I got your message, I didn't know what it meant at first. Then, when you called and explained, I was already at the supermarket. I decided to drive by the Conway house to make sure it was really happening." "And you saw the arrest?" "Yeah, I saw him being let out in handcuffs. Brianna crying on the porch. By the way, Conway said that Brianna may have known about the arrest in advance. Is that true?" Tess was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "We think so. Yes, we have information that a few days before her arrest, she transferred a substantial amount of money into an account at another bank in her own name only and withdrew some of it in cash. Classic behavior of a spouse preparing to arrest his partner. And she arranged this dinner knowing that her husband would soon be behind bars." I chuckled bitterly. I wondered why, to create a semblance of normalcy or to find out if I knew something. Probably both. Tess suggested it was human nature to cling to normality in the face of disaster. And she might have been worried that Conway had shared some information with you that might compromise her. "Do you suspect her of involvement?" "There's no direct evidence yet, but we're looking into all the connections. If it turns out she knew about the scheme and profited from it, then she could be charged, too." We said goodbye, and I drove home. On the way, I got a flat tire. While I waited for the tow truck, I watched the news on my phone. The story about the arrest at Auburn Construction was on the front page of every local paper. Criminal negligence led to tragedy. Construction company executives arrested for falsifying documents. 2 dead, 1 seriously injured. Who will be held accountable for the school tragedy? At home, I checked my answering machine. 5 new messages. 1 from Olivia, 1 from a neighbor, 2 from journalists, and the last one from Brianna. "Mrs. Pute, it's Brianna. We need to talk. It's urgent. Call me back, please." I made myself some tea and sat by the window when the phone rang. It was Brianna again. "Iris," her voice sounded strained. "I need to talk to you in person. It's about Conway and, what happened yesterday." "Brianna, I just came from him," I said tiredly. "He told me everything." "Not everything," she said sharply. "Believe me, not everything. I know you were warned about the arrest. I know who did it, and I know why." I froze, surprised by her knowledge. "How did you know over the phone?" She interrupted. "Can I come to your place in an hour?" I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to see Brianna, but another part of me was intrigued. What else didn't I know? "Okay," I finally said, "come over." Exactly an hour later, the doorbell rang. Brianna stood on the threshold, pale, eyes red from crying, but still impeccably dressed and combed. "Come in," I said, stepping back and letting her into the house. We walked into the living room. Brianna looked around as if assessing the surroundings, then sat down on the couch and placed a file on the coffee table. You were with him today, she began without preamble. What did he tell you? The truth, I answered. That he'd been falsifying documents, knowing about substandard materials, bribing inspectors. And you believed him? Brianna grinned bitterly. You believed that your son, your Conway, had knowingly gone through with it just for the money, didn't you? I looked at her carefully. Not exactly. Brianna opened a folder and pulled out some documents. Yes, he did all this, but not of his own free will. He was forced, threatened. By who? People far more powerful than he was. The mayor, the head of the building committee, the owners of Auburn Construction. It was a system, Iris. Anyone who refused to participate was fired, blackmailed, threatened. One engineer who wanted to go to the police was hit by a car. Accident, of course. I listened, not knowing whether to believe her. If it was true, why hadn't Conway told me about it or the police? Because he's afraid for himself, for me, for you. Brianna looked me straight in the eye. They know where you live, Iris. They know you have a summer house in the foothills. They know you go to book club on Wednesdays. What do you want from me, Brianna? Help. She pulled a flash drive out of her bag. It's evidence. IDs, phone records, photos, anything to prove that Conway was just a pawn in a bigger game. I can't take this to the police. I'm being followed. But you can. No one will suspect you. I stared at the flash drive, hesitant to take it. Why should I believe you? Because I love your son, Brianna said firmly. No matter what. And because I'm pregnant. I'm 3 months pregnant. Conway doesn't know yet. I was numb to the news. Grandson or granddaughter?
Me?
And also, Brianna continued, because Tess Willett's warned you for a reason. She's part of it. Her mother, your friend Olivia, is also involved. They own stock in Auburn Construction through shell companies. That information hit me like a blow to the head. That's impossible, I whispered. Olivia has been my best friend for 40 years. Check it out for yourself. Brianna put the flash drive on the table. All the proof is in here. Tess didn't warn you out of kindness, but so you wouldn't be there during the arrest and hear what Conway might say in the first moments of panic. I stared at the flash drive, feeling the world collapse around me for the second time in 2 days. The week after Conway's arrest had passed like a blur. Auburn was buzzing, a small town rarely the center of such a high-profile scandal. The local papers were full of headlines, negligence or willful misconduct. Who will be held accountable for the school tragedy? Key Auburn Construction figures arrested. I hardly ever left the house for fear of running into people I knew. I ordered groceries by delivery, disconnected my landline phone, and stopped answering calls from unfamiliar numbers. Journalists never gave up trying to get a comment. Several times I saw their cars parked outside my house. On Wednesday morning, when I went out into the garden, a neighbor over the fence called out to me, "Iris, how are you holding up, dear?" Eleanor Parks, a widow like myself, had lived next door for 30 years. "I'm doing fine, Ellie," I answered, trying to sound normal. "Thank you for asking." "It's a terrible story," she shook her head. "The whole town is talking about it. The poor families of the teachers who died. And this girl, Emma, they say she's going to have several more surgeries." I nodded silently, not knowing what to say. "Have you been to see him in prison?" "Yes," I answered briefly, hoping she wouldn't ask any more questions.
What does he say?
"Does he admit guilt?" "Ellie, I'm sorry, but I don't want to discuss this." Sure, she said hurriedly. "I understand. It's just, people say different things. Some people think you might have known about what he was doing." I turned sharply. "What?" "Well, you were an accountant," Eleanor explained awkwardly. "And you and Conway were always close. People think he might have consulted you, or I don't know. We haven't been close in recent years." I cut her off. "And I didn't know anything about his business at the company. Absolutely nothing." Back in the house, I sat by the window thinking about my neighbor's words. So, there were already rumors in town about my possible involvement. No wonder people are always looking for someone else to blame. 2 days later, I went to court for a preliminary hearing. Onway and the other defendants were led into the courtroom in handcuffs and orange prison robes. My son looked gaunt and aged, but he kept a straight face. The judge, an older woman with a shrewd eye, read out the charges: criminal negligence resulting in death, large-scale fraud, forgery of documents, and bribing officials. Bail was denied to all defendants because of the severity of the offenses and the risk of flight. After the hearing, as I was leaving the courthouse, I was surrounded by journalists. I silently walked past them to my car when I heard a familiar voice. She knew. She knew everything, and she didn't warn us. Brianna stood a few steps away from me, her face contorted with anger. She looked flawless even in this situation. Expensive suit, perfect styling, makeup. She came to dinner, got some message, and ran away. Brianna screamed. She knew about the arrest in advance and didn't say a word to us. The reporters instantly turned their attention to her, surrounding her in a tight ring. I used the moment to get in my car and drive away. That evening, all the local news stations showed footage of Brianna accusing me. Some reporters even speculated that I might have been a police informant. "Betrayed your own son?" one headline read. The next morning, Detective Harris from the Economic Crimes Unit visited me. He asked about my relationship with my son and what I knew about his work. "Mrs. Pute," he finally asked, "do you know anything about the message you allegedly received the day your son was arrested?" I hesitated. To admit that Tess Willets had tipped me off was to put her at risk of losing her job. "Yes, I got the message," I said at last, "but it wasn't specific."
Just leave now.
"Don't say anything to him." I didn't know who it was from or what it meant, but I felt uncomfortable and decided to leave. "Did you save that message?"
No.
I deleted it. I thought someone had the wrong number. 3 days later, Conway requested a meeting with me. When I walked into the visiting room, he was waiting for me. He looked even worse than the last time I'd seen him, gaunt and dull-eyed. "Why did you come?" were his first words. "You asked to see me?" I replied, surprised. "I thought you'd say no after everything Brianna said." "Do you believe her? Do you believe that I knew you'd been arrested and didn't warn you?" He stared at me for a long moment, as if trying to read the answer in my eyes. "I don't know what to think, Mom. You were always so right, so principled. You always said you had to take responsibility for your actions. Maybe you thought I deserved to be punished." His words hit me like a slap in the face. "Conway," I said slowly, "I'm your mother. How can you think I would want to see you in prison?" "Because you never fully approved of me," he replied bitterly. "Always thought I could do more, be better, more honest, more principled like you." "I wanted the best for you," I said quietly. "I wanted you to be happy, but not at the expense of other people." "There," he raised his voice, "that's exactly what I'm talking about. There's always a but. There's always some condition for your approval. Is it wrong to want my son to be a good man? Goodbye your standards." He shook his head. "You've never understood how the real world works, Mom. You think you can succeed by always playing by the rules." I couldn't believe my ears. 2 people died. Conway, a girl may never walk again. I didn't want anyone to get hurt. He slammed his fist on the table. I was just doing what everyone else was doing, what I was required to do to get promoted. "And now you're paying for it," I said firmly. "As you should." "You see," he grinned bitterly, "even now you're not on my side. Even now you think I deserve all of this." "I didn't say you deserve jail. But you have to take responsibility for your actions, Conway. It's called responsibility." Responsibility. He said the word as contemptuously as if it were a swear word. "All my life, I've heard you talk about responsibility. Where was your responsibility when you raised me alone after my father died? Where was your understanding when I came home from school to an empty house because you were working late?" I was stunned by this sudden turnaround. "I work to provide for us," I said quietly. "So you could get an education, so we could have a house. It was easier for you to make money than to show love." His voice trembled. "You were always so cold, so calculating, everything by the book, everything by the plan, and I just wanted to be loved, just to feel that you were proud of me no matter what I did." "I loved you, Conway," I said, feeling tears come to my throat. "I've always loved you. I do now. But that doesn't mean I have to approve of everything you do." "Brianna's right."
He shook his head. "You knew about the arrest.
You could have warned us. We could have left, started over somewhere else, and lived on the run. That's not a solution, Conway. That would be a show of loyalty. He looked at me with disappointment. Family has to come first, always. Even if that family is hurting others, I asked quietly. Even then, he answered firmly. Especially then. We stared at each other through the glass, and I knew there was a gap between us that could never be bridged. I have to go, Conway said at last. I have a meeting with my lawyer. I'll come again, I said, not knowing if it was true. Don't, he shook his head. You've made it clear whose side you're on, and it's not my side. I walked out of the prison with a heavy heart, but strangely feeling some relief. 2. For years, I had tried to maintain a relationship with my son, who had grown increasingly distant from me, from my values, from what I had tried to teach him. I turned a blind eye to his coldness, to Brianna's dismissive attitude, to their materialistic lifestyle. But now that it was out in the open, when the masks were off, I felt free for the first time in years. Free from having to pretend everything was okay. Free from a toxic relationship that was only draining me emotionally. A month later, I received a letter from Conway. It was short, just a few lines. Mom, I've agreed to a plea bargain. I'll get 7 years, maybe out in 5, with good behavior. Brianna filed for divorce. She's pregnant, but she says she doesn't want our baby to know me. Maybe it's for the best. I'm not sure I'd be a good father. No apology, no admission of guilt, no request for forgiveness.
Typical Conway.
Always seeing himself as a victim of circumstance, never taking full responsibility. I didn't answer the letter, not out of anger or resentment, but because I didn't know what to say. Words of comfort seemed empty, given the severity of his crime. Instead, I decided to focus on my life. I signed up to volunteer at the local animal shelter, resumed my book club classes, even though I felt prying eyes on me. Some old acquaintances avoided me. Others, on the contrary, showed unexpected kindness. In the fall, I received another letter from Brianna. She wrote that she had given birth to a baby girl, named her Elizabeth, and moved to Portland to start a new life away from scandal. She apologized for her public accusations against me. At the end of the letter was a picture of a newborn, a tiny creature with a frizz of dark hair that looked so much like Conway as a baby. It took my breath away. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to realize that I had a granddaughter I might never see. It was painful, but I understood Brianna's decision. She wanted to protect her child from the shadow of her father's crime to give her a chance at a normal life. Life went on. The town slowly recovered from the shock, though the families of the dead teachers and the injured girl would never fully heal from their trauma. In December, looking out at the falling snow in my garden, I reflected on life choices, mine, Conway's, Brianna's, about how one decision can change everything. How compromises with one's conscience can lead to irreparable consequences. I never regretted my integrity. All my life, I believed in honesty and responsibility, in the fact that you cannot build your happiness on the misfortune of others. These principles cost me my relationship with my son. But I couldn't change my beliefs even for his sake. Now free from the toxic relationship, I was ready to start a new chapter of my life without guilt, without having to justify or apologize for my principles, with the knowledge that my integrity was right always.